Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Saturdays are for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. If you have found this video, please make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or apparently Spotify, I've heard that we're back on Spotify, not really sure. If you are listening on Spotify, how about this? If you're listening on Spotify, go to the YouTube channel and leave a comment saying that you're listening on Spotify. Sitting here with a fine Ave Maria cigar. Never smoked a cigar while recording before, but I thought I would give it a try. And so today is our little midweek episode. I've decided to only do one midweek episode this week. Again, sometimes the schedule works out to where you get one episode. Sometimes I can, come up with an idea for and then put together a quick video for two or one. It really just depends. Some weeks I'm feeling more creative than others about video topics. But today I wanted to give you guys a brief history of the Slavs, a quick early history. Who were the Slavs? Where do they come from? Why are they distinct and important? Obviously, we know today the Slavs are the people who generally inhabit Eastern Europe. They are a member of the Indo-European language family, right? Slavic is an Indo-European language, just like just like Germanic languages. English is a Germanic language, and the Romance languages as well. And so I want to go over a little bit of history in terms of what are some of the early records of them? Because in more modern history or even medieval history, there's a lot of references to the Slavs. But when we were reading through Procopius, we start to see some of the earliest references to the Slavs actually showing up on the scene. A lot of the earlier references, like we're going to talk about Herodotus here in a second. Herodotus only talks about the Slavs in that, like, he knows where they live or he has an idea of where they live, and basically, like, they exist. But apart from that, like, they don't know a whole lot. And so, to begin with, right, Herodotus, he references the Slavs only, in passing in his histories, which was written sometime between 426 and 415 AD. And he just simply knows that they live beyond where the Germanic peoples live. They might be different than the Germanic people, and they probably live north of the Carpathians. But apart from that, Herodotus in his histories doesn't have a whole lot to say about it. Because, how much is he going to know about it? Unless he went out there, which, that's kind of tough traveling, especially for back in the ancient Greek days. Then in 98 AD, we also get a reference from Tacitus, who mentioned the Slavs. He calls them the Veneti, or the Veneti, some seem to be spelled with a T and a D. And Tacitus also notes that the Slavs live beyond the Germanic peoples, but he actually does not categorize that. He doesn't categorize the Veneti as separate from the Germanic people. He thinks that they're the same because they have a very similar lifestyle. They're both warriors. They live in the forest, all those sorts of things. But he does note that the language borrows heavily from their Sarmatian neighbors. The Sarmatians kind of are part of the two-pronged force that boxes the Slavs into, like, northeastern Europe for a while. It's the Sarmatians and the Scythians and the other Iranian-speaking peoples of the steppe, and then the Germanic people more towards the west are kind of boxing the Slavs in up there in northeastern Europe. I do enjoy cigars. Let me know in the comments if you are into cigars. Then later in time, more around the time that we are talking about, you get a couple of Byzantine historians who also make references to the Slavs. One of them is Jordans, or not entirely sure how that name is supposed to be pronounced. And then as well, our old friend Procopius, who we'll be diving back into a little bit in here in just a second. And they mention the Slavs when they start to invade Roman territory, crossing the Danube. It is believed that the Slavs occupied the land north of the Carpathian Mountains. So if you know where the Carpathian Mountains are there in Eastern Europe, it is believed that the Slobs initially lived in the area north of those mountains, the Carpathians, but that later on, as the Germanic tribes migrate westward, as a result of the Hunnic onslaught there in Eastern Europe, that after the Germanic tribes migrate and the Huns go on and chase them, it is believed that the Slavs may have come in and, sorry, I'm lighting the old cigar here again, that the Slavs come in and start to inhabit some of the abandoned territory that was left by the Germanic peoples like the Goths. And certainly we can tell that, from the simple fact that, Ukraine used to be inhabited by the Goths and is now inhabited by Ukrainians who are Slavs. Now, Jordanes also, he describes in his book, Getica, which was written sometime between 550 and 551 AD, he describes three distinct Slavic tribes. One which he calls the Vends, which are the ancestors of the West Slavs, the Antes, which are the ancestors of the East Slavs, and the Skloveni, which are, or who are, the ancestors of the South Slavs. And later on here, I'll get into a little more detail as to who are the South, West, and East Slavs. Now, Procopius makes a couple of mentions of the Slavs during his Wars of Justinian, the book, which we used here. I'll plug it one more time as I'm about to do a little reading out of this. This is the Wars of Justinian. It is a Hackett classic, translated by H.B. Dewing and modernized and revised by Anthony Caldelis of Ohio State. He updated a lot of what his update was using, he uses the Greek names in the book instead of the more Western Roman or Latinized versions of the names in the book. So good. It was, I really enjoyed reading this. I would recommend you guys, if you're interested in this kind of history, check it out. It's really, it's very easy to read. It's not difficult to read. It's not written in like complex, weighty Shakespearean language. Very simple to read. You can read a lot of it too and not really get bored with it necessarily. I mean, so long as you're in the more interesting parts, but you won't get tired from it in the sense that it's difficult to read. I mean, you could very easily give this to a high school student. They could read it and comprehend it without a whole lot of issue. But so here we go. Now, Procopius, at one point here, this is around, the book dates it to early April 537. We are in the Wars of Justinian, book 5, chapter 27. This starting in verse 1. Or, I'm sorry, this will be in verse 2. Well, we'll read kind of through both verses 1 and 2. This is talking about when Justinian sends Belisarius some reinforcements during, I believe this is the Italian campaign. It says, Procopius says, but 20 days after the city and the harbor of Portus were captured, Martinos and Valerius arrived, bringing with them 1,600 horsemen, most of whom were Huns, Slavs, and Anti, who were settled above the Danube River, not far from its banks. So there we see that we have Slavs as well as Huns who are fighting in the Roman army as either mercenaries or I don't think you could quite say foederati, because foederati would have been settled in Roman territory, if I understand this correctly. You can see here that the Romans are using them in their military, And of course, they're being used as cavalry. Slavs in Eastern Europe, like the winged hussars, and all of these. The Slavs, in terms of military, are well known for their horsemanship. Although initially, a lot of early accounts about the Slavs up in kind of the more forested areas of northeastern Europe, it's talked about they conduct a lot of guerrilla warfare. They use a lot of javelins and short range missiles. But as they kind of move out of the woods and out of the swamps out there, because there's a lot of swamps in Eastern Europe. And in fact, interesting little side story. I never knew the meaning of the term or the phrase "beyond the pale." Right? You might say like, "Oh, he did something so bad it was beyond the pale." Well, interestingly enough, I learned this. I took my senior seminar class in college was a history of European fascism, which is a very interesting class. Our professor was a modern Italian historian, and so obviously he does a lot of work with Mussolini and the Italian fascists. And he talked about how during the times of Jewish persecutions in Europe, a lot of them fled to Poland. And at the time, there was an area of Poland that was very marshy, very swampy, pretty empty, and not a lot of people lived there. And so the King of Poland, when he offers the Jews to come live in Poland because they're being persecuted throughout Europe for various reasons, one of the most notable ones is when the Jews are persecuted because they're blamed for the Black Plague in Germany, and the King of Poland offers them refuge in Poland. He basically lets them live in this kind of swampy area. The Jews essentially say like, "Wait, nobody's there. No one's around to like bother us. We can be alone." That sounds fantastic. But that area was kind of called like the Pale, or kind of the area past a little bit where they were living, and so you get this phrase that, oh, it's beyond the pale, as kind of, in a derogatory sense, because that's where a lot of Jews were living, which is just, I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Not sure how that necessarily relates to this, but I just figured, you get interesting stories in here sometimes. But later on in early 546, Procopius makes another reference to the Slavs when they invade Roman territory. They cross the Danube and go raiding down into the Balkan provinces of the Byzantine. He says here, this is in Procopius, Wars of Justinian, Book 7, Chapter 14, verse 24, and a bit of 25 as well. He says, "For a great throng of barbarians recently crossed the river Danube, plundering the country there, and enslaved a great number of Romans. The Herules now suddenly fell upon these barbarians and joined battle with them. And although far outnumbered, they unexpectedly defeated them." So the Slavs there are defeated by the Herules, who were kind of an ally of the Byzantines at this point in time. So again, you see this interesting kind of, as I just said earlier, you had Slavs who were fighting for the Byzantines in their army, but then you're also going to have Slavs who are fighting against the Byzantines, who are raiding against the Byzantines, and later on you're going to get even more Slavic incursions across the Balkans into Roman territory. And not just that, they're going to raid down through all of Greece, so much so to the point where I remember when we talked about this in Byzantine history, when I took it in college, our professor said that there are going to be, as a result of that, there are a lot of Greek people today who actually have more Slavic DNA in them than they have Greek DNA in them, because there were Slavs who settled down in the Peloponnesus and what we would call today Greece. I'm sure I'm going to offend some Greek people by saying this, but sorry, that's just kind of. I mean, if you have any information or data to say that I'm wrong, I'm happy to hear it. I'll issue a correction if I'm proven wrong, of course. But this is not the last of the Slavic incursions into Byzantine territory, really, is the point that I'm trying to make. Now, Who were the what do I mean when I say East Slavs, West Slavs, and South Slavs? Well, obviously these are geographic regions, and Slavs in different geographic regions are going to have slight differences with them between language and culture and that sort of thing. I mean, generally speaking, I was watching a video not too long ago that said that something like Slavic is one of the most mutually intelligible language families in Europe. So that going from like Ukrainian to Russian, they can understand each other better more than like say going from French to Spanish. That Ukrainian and Russian are more similar to each other, and that like a Ukrainian who's listening to a Russian conversation can understand more of it than maybe like a French person could if they were listening to a Spanish conversation. Spanish and French both being in the same language families of the Romance languages. But so East Slavs, right? So more in the East, these would be peoples like the Russians, the Ukrainians, and the Belarusians. West Slavs would include groups like the Poles. Shout out to my fellow Poles out there. Proud Polish heritage here on Professor Wren. Also the Slovaks, the Czechs, and then some other smaller groups that don't have their own country. Like, for example, there's a group called the Silesians from the region of Silesia, or Silesia, who are a somewhat distinct Slavic group, but they don't have their own country. And then South Slavs are down in the Balkans, our friends down in the Balkans. These are groups like the Croats, the Serbs, the Romanians, the Bulgarians, and the Slovenians. Even though Bulgaria is named after the Bulgars, who were actually a Turkic tribe who came and settled down there in southeastern Europe, they adopted Christianity, they adopted Slavic language, and so even though the ruling class were Bulgars, essentially today Bulgarians are really just Slavs with a named after a group of people who are non-Slavic. I remember a few years ago, my younger sister, I have three younger sisters, and the youngest of them played tennis in high school. And at one of her tennis matches, one of the girls on the opposing team was, I can't remember, she was a Bulgarian, either exchange student or her family had moved to the United States from Bulgaria. I can't remember, but I overheard her or someone near her mention that she was from Bulgaria, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And so I kind of struck up a little conversation. And she spoke excellent English. I mean, most people in Europe speak like, several languages. And she also spoke French. I spoke a little French. I do speak a little French. It's not great, but we exchanged a couple like French phrases like "Hello, how are you? How are you doing?" That sort of thing. But it was just very interesting. Now, in terms of some cultural things like religion, for example, Christianity comes to the Slavs through the two Greek saints, Cyril and Methodius. They created an alphabet to bring the Slavs the Bible, because at the time the Slavs had kind of a mutually intelligible language. However, they did not really have a written language at this point in time. So Saint Cyril and Methodius, using the Greek alphabet, kind of adopted the Greek alphabet to fit more of the Slavic language, so that they could bring them, primarily the Bible, the primary written text. But apart from that, it's useful to have a written language, just generally speaking. And so from that, you get the Cyrillic alphabet, named after Saint Cyril. Now, many Slavic peoples took on the Cyrillic alphabet and still use it today, but some others do not. The way you can tell a Slavic country's religion is by looking at what alphabet they used. Now, if a Slavic country is Eastern Orthodox, meaning they do not follow the Pope, they're not part of the Catholic Church, then that Slavic country tends to, or I believe almost universally, uses the Cyrillic alphabet. However, if a Slavic country uses the a Latin alphabet, that means they are Catholic. Or you could say if a Slavic country is Catholic, that means they use the Latin alphabet. Because obviously the influence of the Catholic Church, the universal language of the Catholic Church is Latin. And so those countries are going to take on the Latin alphabet in use of their Slavic language as well. Although it's interesting, for a long time, for example, in Poland, the language of the nobility was actually Latin, and they would not do a whole lot of like reading and writing, or I guess even conversing. Although I find that hard to believe, because Latin is kind of a difficult language to converse in, because there's no vocal inflections. Anytime you want to like emphasize something in a sentence, you need to use like a reflexive pronoun, for example. But the language of the nobility in Poland for a long, long time was actually Latin. And that is because in Poland, they adopted Roman Catholicism. But conversely, like if you look at Russian, for example, Russian uses the Cyrillic alphabet because in Russia, they adopted Orthodox Christianity. Just giving my cigar another light here. Now, Russia, as I just mentioned, is actually a very important inheritor of Byzantine culture. Obviously, the Russians get their Christian faith from the Byzantines, right? Saint Cyril and Methodius came from the Byzantine Empire. Some Russians also believe that Moscow is the third Rome. So the idea here is that the first Rome is the city of Rome in Italy itself. The second Rome is Constantinople. And then the third Rome, after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, becomes then Moscow, because Moscow, the Russians inheriting much of their, like I said, the religion and culture from the Byzantines, are now carrying on that mantle. I think it's a little bit of a stretch, but, you know, if it helps you sleep at night, okay. And what's interesting is that I believe I heard about this in a Lars Brownworth interview at the Smithsonian he did years ago. And he talked about how right before the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the Byzantines sent their imperial throne up to the Russians as kind of, I mean, you almost look at that and you have to, even I, who am a little skeptical about Moscow being the third Rome, you do look at that and say, well, you know, it does seem to, the Byzantines do seem to be saying to the Russians, like, here, guys, you got to carry this on for us because we're about to be finished, and you need to carry on what we've been preserving here. But so that has been our, like I said, this is a brief cursory like intro, like who are the Slavs? You know, they're very early histories and these sorts of things. Obviously, tons more you can get into. I really do find Eastern European history very fascinating. Obviously, I took 2 semesters of Byzantine history in college, which is like medieval European history. I also took 2 semesters of Russian history in college. I've basically taken Russian history from their conversion to Christianity with the Ryukids and Vladimir, all the way up to the fall of communism. And I remember at the end of our, I took a class in college called Russia Revolution to Revolution. And at the very end of the class, we went over a little bit of like modern Russia after the fall of communism. And if you guys are ever interested, there's a rather funny video of one of the premiers of Russia, I guess Prime Minister, Boris Yeltsin, who was in power before Putin. And Yeltsin was a bit of an alcoholic. And so there's a lot of videos of him doing funny antics, like just kind of like drinking beer and trying to conduct like a band out at some festival. And there's a very funny clip in it where he's at a pier and he grabs this like little girl who's in a bathing suit and he throws her off the pier into the water. It's pretty, and it's set to Benny Hill music, which just makes it even funnier. But anyway, so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know I enjoy talking about this kind of history and this kind of culture. Family ties obviously have a good deal to do with it for me, but I also just authentically I find it interesting. I may do a lecture series on Slobs or maybe Russian history in the future. That would certainly be a large undertaking, because there's a lot of Russian history to cover, and it would be a lot of fun. It would be very fascinating. But if you have made it this far in the video, please make sure to give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or apparently Spotify as well, give us a follow on there, and as well, and on any platform you're listening, make sure to give us a 5-star review. You can also find us on Facebook or Instagram at Professor Wren, where I post updates about the show or various other interesting things I find about history that I want to share with you guys. So that is all I have for you today. I'll see y'all next time.